Well, how are we doing, Countryside? Having a good weekend so far? It is great to be here, great to be with you. My name is Sean. I'm one of the pastors here on staff, and we are diving into week 3 of this series we've been in called Margin, where we're looking at what it means to create really essential space in our lives. Like week 1, Pastor Mark talked about what it means when we say less is more. That the common one of the common thought processes in our world today is that if 1 is good, 2 is better, right? And so we talked about how less is actually more, and so that was awesome. If you missed that message, I'd encourage you to go online to teamcountryside.com and catch that. And then last week we had national speaker and author Joe Sangl here. He talked about how margin equals mission, talking about financial margin and relational margin, and that was awesome, by the way, wasn't it? Fantastic time last week. And then the following day, on Monday, we had about 300 people here for the financial learning experience, which was just an amazing time. There's still actually time to sign up for the groups that are based on that, from the I Was Broke, Now I'm Not. And so if you're interested in that, it's a 6-week study. Pastor Bob out in the atrium would love to talk to you and give you more information about that. Today we're going to talk about how stress is bad. That stress is bad. Next week we're going to have baptisms. If you're interested in being baptized, by the way, right after this service, there's going to be a baptism Q&A like Pastor Jamie had said, just to get more information about what baptism would look like for you. Last week, Joe talked to us about how creating margin in our lives can free us up to do so many important things, that margin sets us up to be able to do whatever it is that God calls us to do, wherever we feel Him leading us in our lives, that creating margin frees us up to be able to do those things. And so part of what I want to do today is to be able to build off of that. The opposite of margin, I would say, many of us, if I were to ask you what is the opposite of margin, we'd probably have a whole bunch of different answers, different responses for that. But what I think the opposite of margin would be stress. Stress. And so anybody ever just, enter into seasons of your life where you just feel stressed, you just feel worry, you just feel maybe a little bit more anxious than you would like to feel? No, just me? Okay, cool. I'm there anyways, probably way more often than I should be. But maybe you're here this morning and you're sitting here and you're just like, you know what, right now I don't really remember a time where I didn't feel stressed out. I don't remember the last time I didn't feel worried about something. Because see, Jesus knew that we would have these times where we would be struggling with these kinds of feelings. And so the question is, if Jesus knew that we would feel those things, what do we do about that? What do we do about that? The theme verse for this series, it comes from Matthew chapter 6. It says, so don't worry about these things, like different things going on in life, saying, what will we eat? What will we drink? What will we wear? These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers. But your heavenly Father already knows your needs. So seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and He will give you everything you need. So don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries, for today's trouble is enough for today. See, Jesus knew that we would have stress. Jesus knew that we would encounter times in our lives where we would worry. He knows and He cares, and our ultimate joy is found ultimately in Him. And so, but the stress of this world, what we need to understand is, even though that's true, the stress of this world is still real. And the stress of this world can be due to any number of things going on, things that we have no control over, as well as things that, quite frankly, situations that we get ourselves into when we're really honest about it, things we do to ourselves. And I'm thankful in those times of stress that God is with us through them, that He promises to never leave us, that He promises that He'll never forsake us, that He's always with us. In other words, He's never gonna come up to us in our mess and be like, whoa, You're on your own, kid. Good luck with that one. I'm out. Like sometimes it feels like that. It feels like God is distant when in reality, a lot of times we are the ones who create that distance, but it's never a situation where God just leaves us in our mess and says, good luck, figure it out. Maybe you'll get it, maybe you won't, I don't know, but I'll see you later. Yet so many times our stress can hit and we're there. And so often it's like, we're not fully on board with the fact that God really does have the best way for us. He demonstrates the best way for us to live, and he has a plan for us that is better than anything that we could plan for ourselves. And so we encounter those times where we don't necessarily, like we know that, we've heard that, but a lot of times we don't necessarily feel like that's true in the situation that we're in. And so we take the things of God, the plans we feel he's calling us to do in our lives, we take those things, and a lot of times we begin to push them further and further and further down the list of priorities. And so today I want to talk about 3 common stresses, and yes, there are a lot more sources of stress, but I want to talk about 3 of them. I want to identify 3 of them. And the reality today that stress is real, stress is tough, but what we're going to find out today is that when we seek God first, in the middle of those messes we find ourselves in, that we find out that God really does have a way that's better than our ways and all of that, and we find the best solution, we find also the best prevention for next time we get into those messes. And so the first one, if you're taking notes, is financial stress. Financial stress. I want to talk about how financial stress is a bad thing. Because the reality today is I've never heard anybody say, ever since I got into debt, man, my marriage has been awesome. It's been so much better. Like back before we had payments, man, we fought all the time. But now that we have payments, we never ever fight because now we're in debt. Yes! You don't ever hear people say that, do you? Maybe they say, now I have that thing that I've been wanting for so long, and I went into debt to get that thing, but that's a totally different conversation, right? You just don't hear anybody say those things, but you know people, and I know people, and maybe we've been that person even saying things like, I wish that I could give more to help people who are in need. I wish I could do some of those things, but we're just not able to do that right now. I wish that, one of us could stay home with the kids a little bit more than we're currently able to do, but that's not even close to being an option. And I wish that I didn't have this stress, and we're fighting all the time because we have this financial stress, and financial stress is what? Bad, right? And so the challenging thing is, a lot of us just really don't have a whole lot of understanding of how this works, or at least when we get into the mess, we didn't have a whole lot of understanding of how it works. We get into a mess like that, and we begin to understand very quickly how it works, don't we? I used to be a youth pastor for a long time, and the majority of the time that I spent in youth ministry was in a city that they went from a pretty bad economy, an economy where there weren't a whole lot of jobs for people who didn't have specific skill sets or specific college degrees and things like that. Went from that to an oil boom where now all of a sudden there's high-paying jobs everywhere. And so I had this young guy named Tyler who had come up through our youth program, and over a long process of just kind of working with Tyler and different things that went on in his life. He'd been in and out of the foster care program and that sort of a thing, and just a tough set of circumstances. Got to the point where he was beating all kinds of odds just to graduate high school. The odds were just stacked against him in his life, and he got to that point with a serious sense of accomplishment. And so he decided, you know what? He built some contacts in and out of in high school and in and out of some of the situations he'd been in, and got offered a pretty high-paying oil field job right out of high school. And so through processing, he decided that was what he was going to do. And so we had talked about that for a while, and then he walked out of my office one day, and then it had been a few weeks had gone by. I hadn't seen him, hadn't heard from him. I sent him a few text messages, never got any responses back. And so one day, it was a Wednesday, we had our youth group met on Wednesday nights, And I was sitting in my office, and I was getting some things ready for that Wednesday's youth group, and I just remember sitting there, and we had this coffee shop in our church that was open all the time, and so there were always different vehicles pulling in and out of the parking lot. But I remember one day looking out my window, and I see this pickup drive into the church parking lot, and it was just this brand new Chevy pickup, all the bells and whistles on it, these huge tires, really loud exhaust, and tinted windows. You couldn't see who was driving it. All these lights all over it was like Las Vegas on wheels, this thing. It was just awesome. And so I'm looking at this, I'm like, man, who is the high roller up in this thing? I mean, it's pretty common to see trucks like that in that area, but this truck pulls up into the parking lot, and I'm just waiting to see who's getting out of it. And the door opens, and out jumps Tyler. And I'm like, Tyler got himself a sweet set of wheels. Okay, cool. And so he jumps out of that, and he's walking towards the church office. And so I'm like, I haven't seen him in a while. I'm going to go greet him at the door. And so I meet him out there, and I'm just like, Tyler, sweet ride. And you know that like sense of accomplishment, like when you've just really been working towards something, and you're saving up money for something, whatever it is, you got a goal in mind that you're working towards accomplishing, and you've put in all this time, you've saved up, you've done what it took, and you did it, and you just have that like, yes, I did this. Well, that's not the look that Tyler had. He looked more embarrassed. I'm like, nice truck. And he's like, oh, that thing, I kind of want to talk to you about that. I'm like, okay, you want to talk? And he's like, yeah, I'm not sure if it was a smart decision or not. I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about it. How much did you pay for that? And he goes, it was about $56,000. I'm like, did they pay you your entire year's salary like up front, and then you're able to do that? And he's like, no, man, I got a bank loan. Didn't even need a cosigner. I'm like, okay. He's all proud of that. I'm like, what would they have you pay for a down payment? He's like, that's the coolest thing. I didn't have to pay a down payment. I'm like, oh boy, they saw you coming. And so I'm like, okay, so what's your interest rate? And he goes, 19%. Like he was asking me if that's what it was. I'm like, 19%, okay. Like if he's asking, like, is that okay? Is 19% okay? I'm like, okay, so how long are you financing this truck for, Tyler? He goes, 72 months. And so I'm like, all right. Do you want to talk about this? And he's like, yeah, that's what I came to talk to you about. Like, okay. So I get on my phone, and you just go to Google. You don't even need to download an app for this. You just type in like vehicle loan calculator, and it just pops up on there. And so I'm like, okay, so $56,000 with 72 months you're doing this, and 19% interest. If you were to pay this just month by month, the way that your loan is set up for, how much do you think that you're going to actually end up spending on this truck when your loan is done? And he goes, well, I know, with the interest, it's probably going to be a couple $1,000s more than 56. And I'm like, I'm just going to show him what the screen says. And I show him my phone, and his face just goes white as a ghost. And he's just like, oh, dear. Like, yep, you're going to be paying $94,000 and some change for a truck that you were loaned $56,000 to buy. And so I was like, so let's just talk about it. Say 6-7 years, you've paid the loan off. How much do you think this truck's going to be worth? Driving it the way you're probably going to be driving it and doing some of that stuff. And he's like, 7 years? I don't know, $15,000, $20,000 maybe? And I was like, okay, knowing the way you drive, probably closer to the $15,000 side. So we're paying $94,000 for a truck that's going to be worth $15,000. And nobody had taught him these sorts of things. And the challenge is, so many of us, we just don't understand this. This isn't something that he learned at home. This wasn't something that he learned in school. And quite honestly, he learned this the way that so many of us today learn about it, and that is the hard way. And so let's just be honest. This is a really difficult subject to talk about and to ask about, because we've all made mistakes in some way, shape, or form. And the truth is, many of us, we're embarrassed because we don't understand these things when we feel like we probably should have understood them. And we feel overwhelmed after we've been in them for a while. And we'd rather just kind of put our head in the sand and pretend it's all going to go away, right? We feel helpless. We feel hopeless. We don't understand the principle. And so this is actually in your notes. If you were at the financial learning experience, you heard this verse in Proverbs 22. It says, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. So when we owe, we're actually in bondage to the one that we owe. That's why we don't just say less is more. We say stress is bad. We don't want to be in bondage to someone or something. And now that doesn't mean that all debt is bad. Okay, I don't want to go. Some people will go down that road and just be like, debt is evil. Debt. And that's not the point here in all of this. There's a time for personal debt, like a home loan, that sort of a thing. Even in a lot of cases, a vehicle loan. But things where you need to get into that house, and but there's a big difference between debt on an appreciating asset, like a house, and debt like credit card debt, where we can just get buried. And then there's organizational debt, there's business debt, right? Business owners, you know that a lot of times your business isn't going to exist without some of those. And so it's pretty common in some of those areas. But for our purposes, we're talking about personal debt stress. Now, I want you to imagine, if you will, what it would be like to just be free of financial stress. And some of you are here and you're like, I'm there and it's awesome. Okay. But for the rest of us who are not, just imagine what that would be like. And something breaks, and all you have to do is just get it fixed because you've got that margin like Joe talked about last week. Imagine someone you know is in need, and you're like, you know what? I've been there, and now I can help. Like, if the practical side of this doesn't motivate you, for those of you who are Jesus followers, I pray that the spiritual side will. Because Jesus said in Luke 16, said, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. That if you're faithful with a little, that he will trust you with much. And remember that what we looked at earlier, where Jesus said, seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he will give you everything that you need. And living with integrity in what God trusts us with is actually a way that we can worship him, a way that we can serve him, a way that we can show him that we trust him. If the practical side of being free doesn't motivate you, then if you're a Jesus follower, let the spiritual side, that what we do with what God trusts us with, it truly matters. For faith with a little, he'll trust you with so much more. And yes, that means trusting God with our money first before it goes anywhere else, that he gives us life and he gives us breath and everything that we have, and to trust him is to put him first, even in our finances, even when it's difficult, because when our heart is aligned with God spiritually, it's so much easier to do things right in the rest of the world, in the rest of our lives, in the rest of our interactions with people, in the rest of our day to day. We can pray, God, help me have self-control. Help me to live out your plan. Why is this so important? Because in Proverbs 25, it says, like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks what? Help me out, church. Self-control. See, back in the day, if you were a city without protective walls around the city, you were very vulnerable. You were completely vulnerable to attacks, to lies, to infiltration, that sort of a thing. Didn't have necessarily the technology that we have in our military back then. And so you were vulnerable if the walls were broken down. If the walls were broken down in your life, you were vulnerable to a lack of self-control. The challenge here is that inside of us, it's like that 2-year-old kid in the checkout aisle at the grocery store, right? Just waiting in line. That kid is just waiting to come out, right? Which, by the way, the checkout aisle at the grocery store is like a low blow, if I've ever seen one in my life. Parents, you know what I'm talking about. Like, you go to the grocery store, or you go, let's just say Walmart. You go to Walmart with your whole family. You try to leave your kids home with somebody else most of the time, but you have those times where you go to Walmart and the kids are coming with, and so you go in there and you're strategic, right? You sweep wide around the toy aisle because you don't want them to go to the toy aisle, because then they're just going to whine about all these toys that they want you to spend your money on and all these things, because they're kids and they have no concept of how this whole thing works. And so you sweep really wide. You're going through aisles that, like, you don't even know what this stuff is, but you're just trying to get from the hardware section to the frozen pizzas without your kid throwing a tantrum, right? And so you get through there, you get to the frozen pizzas, you get everything that you came to the store to get. You've even gone around like the aisle with all the bulk candy that you just hope and pray your kid never discovers, right? And you get through all of that, you got everything in the cart that you were planning to get, but now you got to get through the gauntlet, the checkout aisle, where it's like they saved the worst for last, right? And usually there's that one aisle that has like a little bit less candy in it, but the stuff that they have is the stuff you really don't want your kid to get. And so you have to get through there, and you're just like, how am I going to get through here without my kid just throwing a tantrum about the ring pops? I don't know. But the problem is, inside of each and every one of us is that little kid in the candy aisle. We see something that we want, and whether we're in the store and we come across something we want, or we stumble onto Amazon and we find something that we want, and that little kid comes out, right? Like, I want it, I want it, I want it, I want it. Like, ladies, if I can pick on you for a moment. You walk past the clearance aisle in that store you love so much, right? Some of you are like, don't go there, Sean. Don't go there right now. And you're vulnerable to whatever's on sale, right? When you go there and then you get home and you try to convince somebody that it was a good purchase, that it was wise. And so he's like, okay, how much did that bracelet, that top, that pair of pants, that pair of boots, how much did that cost? And you stall for a little bit, right? You're like, well, it was on sale. It was 50% off. And so he's like, okay, cool, 50% off. How much was it? And you're like, well, it was technically, it was on sale. It was $50 after the sale, which means it was $100 before, which means I saved 50% of that, which means technically I just made us $50 buying that. Right? And it's just like nickel and dime and nickel and dime and nickel and dime, and eventually we nickel and dime the ship until it's sunk, right? Guys, you're not like that, are you, man in the house? Guys, we just blow up the whole ship all at once, don't we? We're driving from point A to point B, and we don't necessarily have the intention, but we go past the boat dealership, and we're driving, we're like, I should buy a boat. I should buy a boat. We go home, we're like, babe, I bought a boat. I needed a truck to pull the boat. So now I got a truck and a boat. Now all we need is a lake house. You can thank me later. Who needs the ship to be floating when we have a lake house? God, help me to have self-control. Help me to live out your plans. So we're going to learn today to say no. Everybody say no. That was good. That was good, by the way. So we're going to learn to say no today so that we can say yes for the rest of our lives. We're going to learn to say no for a little while. Why? So we can say yes for the rest of our lives. I'll say it again. Some of you, this is it. This is where you are, and you're going to learn this discipline. We're going to say no for a little while so that we can say yes for the rest of our lives. In a few weeks, we're going to wrap this whole thing up talking about tomorrow matters, and so I don't want to go too far into that topic today, but we may say no to that $5 coffee for now and say yes to the store brand, I don't know, whatever it is, for a little while so that later on we can drink whatever coffee it is that we would want. Your 12-year-old kid saw the advertisement for the new iPhone X, right? And they're like, I need the new iPhone X. I need it. And somewhere along the line, it became like child abuse to not buy your 12-year-old the new iPhone. We're going to say no to the new iPhone now so we can say yes to something better later for the rest of our lives. You may want the brand new car with the brand new smell, and I want to be the only one who ever puts miles on this car, right? And so, but it's like, God, help me have self-control. Help me to understand that you have a better way for me to live this life. My wife and I are right in the middle of this right now. Okay, we put limits on how much we spend on gifts for each other, gifts for anyone for that matter. We put limits on that because it can get out of control. I mean, it's easier for me because I'm kind of a tightwad, but my wife, she's, giving gifts is like her love language. She just loves to give people gifts, and so it's a way that she shows that she cares about people, and so we've learned that we can be creative in some of the ways that we do that. Last summer, I splurged a little bit. I bought a truck. I did, I have to admit it. But you got to understand, okay, this was a truck that I've always wanted, okay? But that little truck is also 19 years old, and I paid cash. It cost me $1,400. It doesn't have four-wheel drive or an extended cab, and if I bring the kids anywhere, there's no one else fitting in that truck. And in a South Dakota winter, there's a good chance someone else is going to be pulling me to my final destination, but I've grown to love that beat-up little truck. We even gave it a name, Truck Norris. I figured Chuck Norris was Walker, Texas Ranger. My truck is a Ford Ranger. It's Truck Norris. Makes me feel better about my little four-cylinder pickup. But I didn't need the financial stress of a payment. I had all kinds of people who were like, certainly you can afford something, the payments on something a little bit newer, maybe something four-wheel drive, I don't know. And whether that's true or not, if I can take all of that and put that towards my college degrees that I'm still trying to diligently pay for, then my family and I are going to have a lot more things we can say yes to in the future with less financial stress, because financial stress can roll into all kinds of other stresses, one of them being the next one that we're going to talk about, relational stress. Relational stress. This relational stress is a fun one, isn't it? Fun one to talk about, especially in church. And so it comes from all sorts of different sources besides finances, okay? And so all kinds of things can cause relational stress. And relational stress, we've been there, right? Whether you're married or have just generally been in a family setting, living in a house with other people, right? We've experienced relational stress. Jesus said, again, going back to that theme verse, Matthew 6, seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he will give you everything that you need. So if we are looking at the overall management of our lives, we know that stress is bad, that financially stress comes most of the time, in most cases, in most of the cases where we get financially stressed out, stress comes from bad budgetary decisions. The same can be said about our relationship budget too, right? Some of you are like, relationship budget? Like, where are you going with this? Follow me on this for a minute. I can't tell you how many times I've had couples sitting across from me in my office, and one of two situations, okay? First one being, they get there, and it's like, we fell madly in love with each other. We got married. It was great. It was awesome. Somewhere down the line, we just sort of drifted away from each other. And make it sound so simple. We just drifted away. We just drifted away. I don't know what happened. We used to love each other so much, and then we just drifted away. So that's the first scenario. The second scenario would be we feel like our kids have just sort of drifted away from us. Don't want anything to do with us anymore, whatever it is. So let's just look at the first scenario, okay? We feel like we've just drifted away from each other. This could be due to any number of circumstances, okay? But what it typically comes down to is one or both spouses have allowed other priorities into their lives before their marriage. In scenario number 2, it's the other way around. We've allowed other priorities into our kids' lives, or we've allowed them to prioritize. Notice I say we've allowed them to prioritize other things above their parents. And so, but you're thinking, but it's more complicated than that. It's really not. In so many ways, it's really not. When you boil the problem down to its lowest common denominator, so often we are not prioritizing the relationship, spouse or kids. We're not prioritizing the relationship in the time that we spend and in the efforts we put in. We're going out after work with the guys every single day. We're seeing the same guys at work every single day, mind you, but it's like after work, it's like, some of the guys are going to go out, they're going to go over there, so I'm just going to go with them and have fun because they're stressed out at home, don't want to go deal with that, so I'm going to go over here and do that. I'm going to go with the guys. Ladies, it's girls' night for the fourth night this week, right? And we've got all these other things. We got all these business opportunities that we're traveling for, and we've been in meetings all day long, and so when we come home, we don't want to talk. We just want to go out in the garage and spin wrenches, or we want to go downstairs and play Xbox. Whatever it is, we intentionally don't spend time with those that we say we love and value the most in our lives, and then we're going to go after a series of this and say, we've drifted apart. We just sort of drifted apart, right? And we just downplay the entire thing. Romans chapter 12, starting with verse 9. It says, love must be sincere. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good. Be devoted. Circle that word in your notes. If you got your Bible open, circle that, put a star around it, put something around that word. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. So what are we going to do? We're going to put God first in our lives, in our relationships. And by doing that, what's the byproduct of that is we're going to honor those that we love. We're going to honor them above ourselves. We're going to be sincere, and we're going to be devoted to them, because that's ultimately what we said we were committing to. Whether it's with our spouse, whether it's with our brothers and sisters, our mom, dad, our kids, we're going to commit to them. We're going to prioritize those relationships. When it comes to my emotional budget, when it comes to my time budget, my energy budget, I'm going to choose to honor those whom I say that I'm loving above everybody else. And I know some of you are like, well, I'm committed. Pastor Sean, my relationship budget isn't the problem. It's his. It's hers. You don't get it, Pastor Sean. I'm not the problem. I'm committed. By the way, commitment isn't even necessarily where we're going with this. But we'll go here for a minute, okay? Let's just say 90% of the problem is their relationship budget. We'll say, okay, yeah. But you're like, no. It's 100% of the problem. It's her problem. It's his problem, 100%. No. It's never 100% of the problem. Okay? Let's say 90% of the problem is their problem. What if instead of focusing on their 90, you focused on your 10? See, that's tough, isn't it? Because if we can focus on their 90, we don't have to pay attention to our 10. Because we're like, well, the majority of the bad decisions are their bad decisions. Well, that may be true. But 10% of those bad decisions are my decisions that I'm making, and I'm ignoring them by just sitting here and casting all this light on that. But if I focus on my 10, that'll start building back a relationship budget. And when we talk about building back a budget, we're not talking about building back chunks at a time. We're talking about building back little by little by little by. You get the point, right? And listen, I get it. You may have some tough relationship stuff going on, stuff that we don't even want to talk about it, right? What helps me find peace is knowing that my role sometimes is to just love the person. Just love them through it and let God do his thing. Because when we truly trust God, that God's going to do what he says he's going to do in our relationships, sometimes what he calls us to do is just sit back and just watch him do his work, because he's really good at doing what he does. So what are we going to do? We're going to prioritize significant relationships. We need to prioritize those that we're in significant relationships with, our spouse, our kids, our closest friends. If the budget is off, we've got to begin to check our priorities, the list of priorities in our own lives, because relationship stress is bad, and love must be sincere, like this passage says. We need to hate what is evil. We need to cling to what is good. We need to be devoted to one another in love and honoring others above ourselves. The third stressor I want to talk about, the last one, is schedule stress. You can call it schedule stress, you can call it time stress, you can call it calendar, whatever you want to call it. That is the general idea, is our schedule. This is where we look at our calendar, and maybe you got like a Google Calendar on your phone, and you look at that Google Calendar on your phone, and we see absolutely no room for margin whatsoever in the usage of our time, right? We're working 50 plus hours a week, and the kids are in school. The kids are at different schools. They're in after school programs. Each kid seems to be in 12 different sports, all on traveling teams. We're trying to figure out how to multiply our time and be at 25 different things all at the same time on the weekends. And we look out at our foreseeable future a lot of times, and it just seems like there is absolutely no light at the end of our time tunnel. Like, I don't know if you do this like I do. There was a time in my life where I was really stressed out about just the amount of stuff that was going on, and I was kind of looking at each individual thing on my schedule as like a little wall in a tunnel, so like a little kind of arced wall. And sometimes we look out at the tunnel of things going on, and it's just like we got the kids' school to get to. We've got work where it's just a particularly busy season that we're going through, right? And then we've got the next wall component is like the activities our kids are in, and then this thing, and we got this social event going up, and we got this thing going on, and we got that thing, and all of a sudden we've got this tunnel that we're starting to build with the different things that are going on in our lives. And a lot of times we'll be back here and we're looking down that tunnel and we're just like, I don't even see a speck of light coming through at the end of this tunnel. And maybe it's not even that you've got a whole bunch of hard scheduled things going on, but you've got this like lurking to-do list on your phone. I don't know if maybe you're like me and you have something that you need to do, so you pop open the Note app on your phone, and all of a sudden you're just like, it's like snarling at me. I'm just going to kind of put that away and pretend it's Sunday. I'm not going to deal with that today, right? And so we do all that sort of a thing. What do we do when there's not nearly enough time to get all this stuff done? One of the things we start with is we go back to that verse in Matthew. We put him first in all that we do. We seek the kingdom of God first. And when we do that and we live how he's calling us to live, we'll start to notice the things in our schedule that probably don't even need to be there to begin with, or some things that don't need to be there quite as often as we have them there. I'm starting to step on some toes right now, but I don't really care. So anyways, Ephesians 5, it says, "Be careful then how you live, not as unwise people, but as" what? Wise. Saying we all can do this, by the way. We've all got access to these tools. Making the most of the time because the days are evil. In fact, we don't even need to look very hard to find all kinds of passages about this very thing. Proverbs 27 tells us we don't even know what tomorrow is going to hold. The book of James says the very same thing, but adds to it and says, but our life today is but a vapor. Here today and gone tomorrow. Like, we look at our kids as they grow up. Like, I looked at my 10-year-old the other day. I'm just looking at him just like, how is he up to my shoulder already? Like, these kids are supposed to be like little babies forever. And like, my parents and every older person when my kids were born were all like, you're going to blink and you're going to miss them. And I'm like, yeah, it's not happening, as I'm holding these little loud things that are crying and making messy diapers and all that. I'm like, they can't get bigger fast enough. And all of a sudden, he's 10 years old. He's almost looking at me on eye level, and I'm like, you really do blink and miss them. It is crazy how that works when that happens. Like, we need to budget our time. We need to budget our time. Just like making a financial budget, you can list out all the different things that you need to get done and put them in order of importance. And we say, we all know that spending time with God every day is something we need to be doing every day. So we put that on the schedule. We know that we've got to work, we've got to sustain our life somehow, so we schedule that in. There's those things that are kind of non-negotiables. You schedule them in. We know that we've been having relationship stress. We're scheduling in time with those we're in significant relationships with. We're scheduling out our kids' lives the same way. We're prioritizing youth group for our teenagers. We're wanting them to live in a way that we want them to live. Like, we know what's best for them. And the cool thing is, they're not 18 yet. They don't get a say in the matter, right? And so we're prioritizing things for them. We're prioritizing our life groups. We're allowing our schedules, our own schedules, to show our kids what's most important to us. We're budgeting our time. Things further down the list that don't deserve as much time, they don't fit as much into the budget, and we start to cut back what needs to be cut back. So we're going to be strategic where we say yes and where we say no. See, just like our financial stress, we need to learn to say no to certain things now so we can say yes to the right things. See, how do we say no to the good so that we can say yes to the best? Because sometimes we look at our calendar and there are just things that are in there, reoccurring things, just things that are in our calendar, in our schedule, that are obvious things that we could eliminate. But there's those times where it's just not so clear. And sometimes you may be looking at your calendar now and you're just like, Pastor Sean, there's nothing I can clear off of here. Well, here's the thing. To start now, you honor your yeses. Honor the things you've already agreed to doing and get them out of the way. Get them done. Do them with excellence. Do them the best you can. Show God in everything that you're doing. But when it comes to future scheduling, be cautious on what you say yes to. Careful on what you say yes to and what you say no to. Be ruthless in what we say yes to. Because get this, every single time we say yes to something, we're effectively saying no to something else. So you may be saying yes to something that by itself is a good thing, but in saying yes to that good thing, you may be saying no to something even better for you, something even more important. So anyways, let's take a big step back and look at all this all at once. The reality today is we can stumble into debt, but we'll never stumble back out of debt. We can get to a point where we feel like we've drifted away from those that we are closest to, but we're never going to just kind of magically drift back towards them. We can look at our schedule and just feel like things just got out of control, but the opposite is not going to just magically happen. We've got to be intentional with these things. De-stressing our finances and de-stressing our relationships and de-stressing our calendar is going to take intentional effort. And you can feel like you've mistaken your way into the mess, but we'll never mistake our way out of the mess. And that's why we need a plan. This is spiritual. This is biblical. James 1:5 says, if any of you lacks wisdom, there it is again, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. Asking God for wisdom. It's literally an ask away. Proverbs 21 says, the plans of the diligent lead to profit, surely as haste leads to poverty. So as far as financial, we've got the I was broke, now I'm not classes that are beginning. You can sign up for one of those right away and get plugged in and start making good choices there. As far as relationship goes, we've got life groups that go year round. You can get into one of those and begin to be in a community with other people where accountability is also found, where we can begin to push each other on the amount of things that are in our schedules. And so the question then becomes, what is your next step? What's your next step in all of this? Some of you may be making great financial decisions, and it's time for you to help someone else begin to make the same. Some of you may be doing great relationally, and it's time to come alongside someone else who's maybe not making such great decisions, and just start walking with them. Some of you may have all kinds of time, and it's time to spend some of that time showing others how to simplify their calendar. But we'll be faithful to our God because he's been faithful to us. He gave us this life. He gave us his son, Jesus, ultimately, so that we could live eternally. And therefore, our only reasonable response is to give our entire lives back to him. What do we know? We say, God, you are the one who blessed us with this. God, you blessed us with gifts. You blessed us with an income. You blessed us with people around us, whether they're our family or other people within this community. You've blessed us with resources and with time. These do not belong to us. They are yours to begin with. Let's pray. God, we thank you today for who you are. We thank you for the opportunities that you've given us to discuss these things. We thank you that you gave us a plan for our lives that is far greater than anything that we could plan and dream up on our own. And so, God, we thank you that you created this world, that you created everything in it, and yet at the same time, you still know every single one of us. You know every hair on our heads. And Lord, you still have a plan individually for each and every one of us that's drastically different from the person who's sitting next to us. And God, I think that's awesome. And Lord, many of us have been dealing with different stresses in our lives. And we ask today that you would help us to understand right where we are, that you've given us a clear direction, whether we're feeling lost and stuck in our financial world, in our relationships. They've gotten to a place where we never thought they would. In our schedule, we just feel like it's entirely out of control. God, help us to prioritize the things of you. I just want to pause there for a moment, every head bowed, every eye still closed. Because for some of you, you're not going to quite connect the dots on all this stuff yet, and that might be because you haven't asked Jesus to be the leader and the Lord of your life. And so what I want to do right now is just give you an opportunity. If that's you, that's your next step today. None of this is really going to make sense until you say, God, and you say it honestly, God, I want you to be the Lord of my life. And if that's you, you can repeat these words after me. You can do it out loud. You can do it in your head, knowing that God is going to hear it either way when we come to him with a pure heart like that and say, Jesus, I thank you for loving me enough to die on a cross for me. And I choose today to believe that you did that for me. And in declaring that, I know that I've lived my life totally different than the way that you've wanted me to live it. And so I ask that you come into my life. Forgive me for those things and make me that new creation that your word talks about. So this is it, Lord. You have my heart. The old is gone, the new has come. And it's in your name. If that's you this morning, we would love to be able to celebrate that with you and give you some resources to help you on your way. Back in the Welcome Center, there's actually a little card, a little program thing. It says reset on it. It actually explains that whole decision a lot better than I just did in the couple seconds I just spent on it to help you in your journey. If you're just still toying with the idea of doing that, I'd encourage you to grab one of those. We also, if you don't have a Bible of your own, we'd love to get one of those in your hands as well. But for the rest of us, let's continue praying. God, thank you for direction. Thank you for purpose. Guide us this week as we seek to navigate this life that you've called us to live. And so, God, we thank you for that. And it's in your name we pray. And all God's people said, amen. Have a great